the guys from Ping, they've kind of shown me how much the equipment matters.
I just love that I can hit any shot I kind of want.
We're going to be able to tell some fun stories about what goes on here to help golfers play better golf.
Welcome back to the Ping Proving Grounds podcast. I'm Shane Bacon. That is Marty Jertson. Marty, today we're going to talk about something that I'm very interested in because I feel like, there's a lot of things in golf we talk about are age-old debates. I feel like this is a modern debate. This isn't age-old. I mean, for years, the thought process for professional golfers and good players was get the ball in the fairway. You think about U.S. Opens and, tough golf courses that we play each and every week, and players were dedicated to find the fairway first, and there was a lot of irons off tees. And that mentality over the last decade or two has totally flipped. And you're seeing, I feel like it kind of started back in the Tiger VJ days when VJ would just pound driver up fairways and didn't care where it went. And it's gone from find the fairway, and that's the benefit, to beat it off the tee as far as you can hit it and go find it. And that's the advantage. So today I want to discuss with you driving in terms of distance versus accuracy and what is more important. And I want to start with this. When did technology shift? When did the idea of you guys building golf clubs for distance in theory over accuracy, or maybe distance being more important than in theory accuracy, shift like it did for the modern day player?
This topic is so juicy, and I think you brought up the examples of VJ and Tiger. Tiger was that great example where he was like 150th or 180th in fairways hit, driving accuracy, but he was hitting it on average at the time back in Tiger 2000 days or whatever, like 30 yards, 25, 30 yards past the tour average, and he had a driving advantage. So I think it was that culmination of like, okay, Tiger's doing this. And then that metric of strokes gained, and the industry has to give Mark Brody tons of credit for that.
Absolutely.
Writing his book. So it's like, okay, then we're still kind of connecting dots on those things to develop that kind of, to answer this question really and it's really, I think, this is why I love doing this podcast. It's not a binary answer. It's like, what's more important, distance or accuracy? And the answer, it's not yes or no, right? There's nuance between those things. And what's really cool is that we've used some of that, like those analytics, to help answer that question that we could talk about today, which is really fun.
Yeah, I kind of go back. I'm 39 years old. I was playing high school golf in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I always felt like driving accuracy for me was the thing I struggled the most with. I would always lean on the 2-iron. I went through a time in college and just after college where I don't want to say I necessarily had the driver yips, but I would hit this 2-iron all the time off tees because I could hit it in the 250 range, as a 22-year-old, and I could live with that. And it's funny because now I feel like the most reliable club in my bag in terms of finding a fairway or having to hit a pressure-packed golf shot is the driver. I mean, the driver has become one of my favorite clubs in terms of reliability, and it's just so wild to think of like the old Shane and the way I thought about the driver versus, this 2023 version where when the hole's tight, I will tee the driver a little bit lower and kind of squeeze it out there.
Yeah, and that's what you're seeing all the tour guys do as well. So you're seeing the driver go straighter. It's more forgiving. I think players know that driving is super important, so they're practicing it a lot more. And then certainly a lot of it, Shane, which is we can get into, is golf course dependent. I mean, that 2-iron going down there 250, you come back here to Arizona and play some of these courses, and that's like the only shot that the hole gives you, obviously. So there is a golf course dependent condition around this, which is quite fun because then we build tools to help answer that question, what's more important, distance or accuracy? And today we're going to talk about this ratio of the two. Like what your golf course penalty is a big part of that equation, that calculus for you as a golfer. But yeah, I think we've seen a lot of players just both, I think, embrace the analytics of it, as well as the driver being more forgiving and spending more time on that technique. And I think you're seeing that kind of the modern day, and what you're experiencing, me and the tour players, is that culmination of that intersection of both of those things.
And Marty, something I do want to do during this conversation is really kind of separate maybe what a professional golfer or a really good amateur golfer might think on this topic versus
Yes.
that middling handicap player. Because I do feel like, and maybe this is just me, I'd like your thoughts on this, but I feel like there's so much talk about technology in the game, and it feels like we always lean on what the pro is doing. And I've had a couple of buddies
Yes.
in my life that when driving went from like leaning a little heavy on the spin to be a little bit more accurate to taking spin off of these drivers and launching it really high and trying to get the most out of it in terms of the way you're hitting the golf ball. You know, you see Rory McIlroy swing up at the golf ball so much and launch it at whatever, 13 or 14. And you feel like people should be doing that. And I'm interested in your thoughts on how players, a 10 handicap, a 12 handicap, a 15 handicap, should approach driving because it's their course dependent, like you said. How do they play
Yeah.
their particular golf course? But it's also maybe
Yeah.
what suits the way they swing the golf club as well.
Yeah, Shane, the way I like to frame this in the very simple is the goal of a driver fitting and just driving the golf ball is to maximize distance while being mindful of dispersion, right? Because so it's like your goal is to hit as far as possible, but you want to eliminate grotesque misses that are going to cause you penalty shots,
Right.
out of bounds, water, what have you, right? So it's to maximize distance while being mindful of that dispersion. And for your club golfer, a gain of 20 yards off the tee is going to improve your strokes gain driving, ultimately lowering your score by 2.3 shots. So 20 yards is going to be 2.3 shots. If you're a PGA Tour player, 20 yards is one shot, right? Because your game's already, everything's kind of already tightened up,
Right.
so to speak. So that shows the value of gaining distance for your club golfer is even more important from a scoring standpoint, because after you drive it down there further, you're going to have kind of less chances to compound errors between where you drive it and getting to the green, right? So it shows that there is even more importance for the club golfer to hit the ball further. Now let's talk about accuracy. If for you to gain one shot in accuracy, which is left-right dispersion, the PGA Tour player, if they tighten their cone or their dispersion by 7 yards, that would improve their strokes gain driving. That would effectively save one shot around.
Okay.
But if you're that same 18 handicap or club golfer player, you would have to improve your dispersion by 10 yards. So you see, we got in dispersion, we got 7 yards, 10 yards is one shot. But from distance, we have 20 yards being one shot around, or 2.3. So when you kind of do the math on that ratio for your club golfer, it's way more important, or a bigger premium even than your tour player, to emphasize gaining distance. And I think that's something even the good fitters out there might still have a little bit of that bias from the past where, hey, we need to tighten somebody's impact dispersion. We need to get you to hit more fairways. Well, if somebody's already hitting it relatively straight, we've seen great success kind of shifting that mindset in your fitting to be a little bit more, give yourself permission as the fitter to consider a driver that might go further with maybe even the same or a little bit more offline. It could be more beneficial for the player.
What's been so interesting about getting fit in my time with Ping is you'll get in the right head, or you'll get in a head that is going to be the one you're going to use, kind of your gamer head. And then and again, this is why it's so important to get fit, in my opinion, is then you can manipulate loft, you can manipulate shaft. There's so much to do. And I feel like so much of the time golfers blame themselves for bad shots or bad swings, or to your point, dispersion issues, right? Oh, this driver's going
Yep.
right. I must be coming over the top of it, or I must be doing something to pull this golf shot. And it could simply be that shaft isn't right in your golf club. And one of my favorite parts about the fitting process is getting the head dialed, is getting the loft dialed, and then going through those
Yep.
processes with the shaft, because that shaft can do so much in terms of kind of tightening things up.
Yeah, the shaft's a big deal, Shane, when it comes to when we're talking about this topic of distance and inaccuracy, because you can use the shaft and the both the stiffness properties and all the weight and center of gravity
Right.
properties to change that left-right dispersion, right? And a lot of times what you want to do is maybe not change the shaft and the balance point to get more draw bias. It's to eliminate that right miss, and then your psychology is freed up. You can have more of your natural release pattern, right? Type of thing, and then you can swing harder and you hit it further, and you know that 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 foul ball to the right is no longer going to be in there. So a lot of times it's gaining freedom from a specific miss type of thing. But one of the fun things, Shane, in shafts, we're talking about the concept of shafts here, the topic of shafts, is how do we use shaft technology to influence this distance versus accuracy topic? And a big thing that we've done, and a lot of folks, I think for a while, we were a little controversial because we had our driver at 45 3/4 inches standard length, right? And everyone's like, oh, the tour players are playing drivers that are 44 and a half. You need a tighten dispersion. You go shorter, you're going to hit it straighter. All these things are kind of floating out there. We kept doing the research, and we were like, well, we don't really see a compelling reason to go shorter as our stock length. We see that at a relatively longer length, the golfer's going to have this is getting a little technical, but shift their swing direction a little more to the right. They're going to hit more up on the ball. You mentioned Rory hitting more up, more positive angle of attack, swinging more right is generally what a lot of the club golfers that come over the top and hit the wifey kind of slice out there need. But how do we have that longer length without the club getting too heavy, right? That's kind of where we needed to innovate. And we spent a lot of time, we've evolved this technology over the last decade plus of having super counterbalance shafts. So you look at our quote unquote stock shaft, we like to call them proprietary, is called the Alta CB. And that CB stands for counterbalance.
Okay.
And that really is the secret sauce, Shane, of like the G430 driver Alta shafts being 45 3/4. That's the swing weight still perfect for the player. It's D2, D3, whatever we need it to do to optimize it. And we still have a lot of mass in the head. So you can go longer, doesn't feel too heavy to the golfer, but we still have that mass to get momentum. That's kind of all this is kind of working towards that concept. We're putting a premium on our default build to be biased for distance and while being mindful of accuracy.
All right, Marty, take me back to your initial designs with the driver, because I can only imagine that as you're designing drivers and you're going through that process, which is so cool to see. I mean, you're literally building these new clubs. You're finding, I mean, you've told the turbulator story on this podcast before, but you're finding ways to change the look or the feel or obviously the design of a driver. What are you looking for as you're going through that design process in terms of both accuracy and distance? Like, what are the numbers that get you excited? Are you gaining 5 yards, 10 yards, ping man swinging this thing and it's a little tighter dispersion? Like, what are those numbers that you guys are looking to see before you maybe take it to your boss and go, hey, I think this is the one?
Yeah, it's like trying to eke out some improvements. It starts in the design world where we're just doing things on the computer, Shane. It's like just modeling, okay?
Gotcha.
If I change this geometry, if I could get the wall thickness thinner in this one area, if I can save some weight from the crown, if I can save some weight from the face, I can move that weight to move the center of gravity lower and deeper. And when I do that, the moment of inertia goes up. And then we know predictively, because we've made some really cool prototypes here, Shane, where we can have the same CG, but we can vary the moment of inertia. We'll put on the robot, we hit it all over the face, and we can kind of prove that hypothesis, that higher moment of inertia will help you hit it straighter, right? But the challenge is, and this is where I think we have really done at Ping, is we want to have high MOI. And this was kind of a thought in the marketplace for a long time. Oh, high MOI drivers always spin a lot, right? Well, we broke through that, right? You can have a high MOI driver that spins low. That's what our LST is and some of these other things. So we're really trying to move center of gravity low, deep at the right amount while maximizing MOI. And then the payoff to the golfer is being able to measure that both in player testing, where we see increases in ball speed, distance, carry, and dispersion, and also put it on the robot. And we put on the robot, we can heat map the face, hit it all over the face in a 9-position test and see, okay, yes, I improved the moment of inertia on this driver design, or I changed the face shaping like our consistency, and we see higher ball speed across the face. We see better dispersion. and then connect those dots. Ultimately, Shane, it's the player testing, because that's the real world, what me and you and our golfer out there is going to experience. That is the most fun to look at in our data analysis.
Okay, let me ask you this. I know you've already kind of answered a little bit of this, but let's say guy A hits 14 of 14 fairways, averages 260 off the tee, versus guy B hits 7 of 14 fairways and it's at 300 yards off the tee. Who is at the advantage in golf in 2023?
Yeah, so if you're on an average penalty golf course, that player that's 40 yards down there, for those same reasons we talked about, as long as those 7 that miss the fairway aren't crazy exotically offline, right?
Okay.
So as long as your dispersion grows, kind of like a cone, that's a good way to kind of think of it, is there's this cone out there, and that ratio of distance to accuracy for the everyday golfer, we kind of talked about that a little bit, what those numbers are, is 2 to 1. So for every 2 yards you gain in distance, you can live with 1 more yard of offline. What does this mean if you go get fit? If you go take your gamer driver, then you're going to go try our G430 with the Alta CB. Might be a little longer than what you're used to. You got the launch conditions dialed in. It's 20 yards further, right? If your dispersion, most of the time we see that our dispersion decreases because of all of our technology and inertia and things of that nature. But if your dispersion is it doesn't grow by more than 10 yards, right? You gain 20 down the fairway. As long as you didn't grow by more than 10 yards of offline left to right, that will be a positive from a strokes gain driving or a scoring standpoint. And quite frankly, it's fun. You can hit it by your buddies and things of that nature. So what's really cool is that when you can hit it 20 yards further, and this is what we quite often see, and also keep your dispersion tighten it, then you're really going to compound those gains. And that's where you get more into the, your driver fit gained you 3 or 4 shots around. We see that very often.
How do you find more distance all the time? I think this is something that consumers ask a lot about a new driver.
Yeah.
This is the longest driver ever made. This one's going longer. I can tell you 430 is longer than 425. I mean, that's been my personal experience. It just is. But how do you keep finding this distance in these drivers while also maintaining a regulated driver by the USGA and the R&A?
Yeah, I think, Shane, for us, it's all about compound interest. It's stacking things. It's okay, we come out with a new technology. Let's not take away something that we already gave the golfer, right? And that is really hard to do. It sounds easy, but it's really hard to do. So, and looking at the driver, we were talking about shafts is a system. So our counterbalance shafts is a super important part for most golfers that are playing our Alta CB at 45 3/4. Optimizing the head weight, and being able to deliver that to the golfer. So I think stacking things like the shaft, the system design, going a little bit longer, stacking with the G430, it's the thinnest face we've ever had. And a lot of that is born through our modeling techniques, a lot of super compute and things we're doing on the golf physics side. It's consistency, because you don't want to go out and pick the driver that you hit the furthest with your one best shot. That's something that I think we've seen our fitters and golfers get more used to, is go out and evaluate drivers and look at your dispersion on all 10 or 20 shots and your average distance on all those hits, because things like consistency are going to give you more distance when you hit it low on the face. So Shane, when you're experiencing the 430 going further, me too, a lot of it is we're not hitting it perfect every time. You're teeing it low. You're hitting your stingers out there. They're going further. A lot of that is impacts that aren't perfectly centered, right? So it's adding that up. It's adding moment of inertia up. It's more ball speed through materials, face design, more club head speed through turbulators. You start stacking all these things up. And that's where you get that compound interest, and you can have drivers, and we're doing it. We're seeing it in real life that keep going a little bit further and or a little bit straighter every time we launch one out in the market.
How much is the sweet spot focused in design versus around the face? Because, like that hot toe has been a big topic over the last few years. If you hit the ball on that top left part of the driver, it's a miss hit, but it can still go plenty far. That was not the case, 15, 20 years ago. How much, and I know you mentioned the 9 spots on the driver you do at the robot testing, how much is the focus on not just the sweet spots in terms of where you're hitting these golf clubs, specifically the driver, but the miss hits? Like, how can you gain the most out of a miss hit for the average player?
Yeah, it's huge. And we've done a lot of research on what does that dispersion pattern look like for the better player? What does it look like for your everyday golfer? And for your everyday golfer, that impact dispersion where you hit it around the face is obviously way bigger. So we put more of a priority on a moment of inertia on our max driver that's going to spin the appropriate amount for that golfer, right? Because their impact dispersion is a little bit bigger. This gets pretty nuanced though, Shane, because what we've come to find out in this kind of fresh research is that the tour player also benefits from super high inertia. And the reason why is because the consequence of their misses at more distance and more speed is more severe. So a very high inertia driver for a high speed player is also super beneficial. I think the conclusion is high inertia and high forgiveness, basically what your question was, impact around the face is a very big deal for all levels of golfers. And so we prioritize that through our testing that we do. I think using the CG shifter can kind of move where that perfect quote unquote sweet spot is, or where the CG is. And it's a really big deal. I think we can evaluate it in the fitting process. That kind of concept of the high toe shot, which is high, top left of the face for you, top right of the face for me, is a little bit that idea that you need to hit it in the high toe to get your furthest distance has kind of gone away. It was it was something that existed when drivers had too high of spin to be perfect if you hit it in the middle of the face. So what would happen with that high toe ball? You would hit it in the high toe and you would actually lose ball speed, right?
Okay.
But you spun it way less. And because you spun it way less, the ball would go further. So it actually wasn't the quote unquote hot spot from a ball speed standpoint, but it was the hot spot from a distance standpoint. Now we've innovated on our drivers, moved the CG lower. Now your centered hit hopefully will have those perfect launch conditions. Right. So if the high toe ball goes the furthest for you, it means that your center hit is probably too high of spin to begin with. So that's just kind of something to be mindful of in the modern day of how we're kind of trying to dial in launch and spin.
Marty, there was a time in, I believe it was the early 2000s, and it wasn't so much a ping thing, but some other manufacturers came out with some different designed golf clubs. And I think a lot of this was, as you said, throwing some information into a computer, and they basically, putting out the output was this design is going to make the most sense. I mean, I remember there were triangle drivers, there were square drivers. Do you think we'll ever go back to that? Is there ever going to be a point where that is again what the computer tells us makes the most sense?
I think what we saw with those was, hey, USGA had a rule or something like you have a rule. Let's try to go right to the edge of the wall of the rule.
Gotcha.
Right. So, for example, if we wanted to make the highest MOI driver from a heel toe impact standpoint, something square-ish might make sense. But as a golfer, Shane, me and you, we don't miss our drivers on a perfectly straight line, heel and toe.
Right, totally.
We miss them high and low and in an ellipse pattern. And all of us have different ellipse patterns and shapes that are a little bit tilted. So if you get myopically focused on maximizing one thing, I think the lesson learned is that will cost you in overall performance. So that is, I think, the big challenge that we're after in product development and fitting. In this topic of distance versus accuracy, there's nuance to all these things. And so how do you maximize overall performance? How can you have high inertia heel toe and high inertia high low and marry those two things together? And that's what our driver designs have kind of been geared towards, that overall on the course, all around performance. You can have distance and accuracy together. It's no longer a choice like high MOI, high spin, you're going to hit it shorter, right? You can have both. You can have the ball speed, you can have the perfect launch conditions, you can have the MOI, and it's all positive sum. It's going to compound together.
Marty, shout out to the stack system for this, because I'm sure this is an answer at times, but what do you think, or what do your fitters tell you when they have players come through? How often are they speaking of, I want more distance versus I want to hit it straighter?
Yeah, it's almost exclusively
it's heavily distance. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm assuming that's the point people make is I want to hit the ball longer.
Yes, it is. I mean, we do run into the scenario, which is, you get some players that hit like foul balls, right? That's what you don't want, right? That's where we can do some things in the club design to help eliminate the foul balls. You might need to work on your swing a little bit. As long as you're not
Practice?
hitting the foul balls, exactly. As long as you're not hitting the foul balls, you should be focusing on distance to accurate versus accuracy at a ratio of 3-1 if you're a tour player, and 2-1 if you're a club golfer. We have some great examples of this, Shane. Like Victor Hovland is an awesome example of this. From, let's see, 2020 to right now, he has gained like 8 to 10 yards. If you go to Data Golf, look up his data, he has gained 8 to 10 yards, and he's lost like 1 or 2% accuracy, but his strokes gained driving per round. So he's an example that gained distance, lost a little bit of accuracy, but the net benefit, I think, is his strokes gained driving improved like 0.3 shots around, somewhere right in there. That's a shot a tournament, right? And the distance he's gained and the speed is helped his iron play. And Shane, one thing, we interviewed Joaquin, and we also know this about Victor. Both of them play a driver that's 45 3/4, or Joaquin's like almost 46, right?
Okay.
So give yourself permission, I think, for the listener out there, to consider a driver over 45 1/4, right? Our tour average, I did a poll on Twitter, actually. I said, hey, what do you think the average driver distance is with our tour staff? And I put like 44, 44 and a half, 45, 45 1/4, something like that. And I kind of did it in that way on purpose. The right answer is 45 1/4. What most people picked was 44 and a half. I cannot believe people still think the average driver length is shorter than it actually is. And again, a lot of that goes to the fact that our driver's so forgiving, you can play a little bit longer. And Victor has really enjoyed that.
Marty, I know you're always a guy that's trying to simplify this for the player. You're always looking at online tools and things to get to your fitters to make it easier for someone at home to understand, because there's so much nuance that goes into these types of topics. Is there a tool you're working on, or a tool you have developed that can help people kind of understand driver distance versus driving accuracy, and maybe kind of marry those two things together?
Yeah, Shane, let me see if I can share my screen here a little bit.
A reminder, by the way, the podcasts are all on YouTube. So if you ever want to see what Marty's talking about, if he mentions that, just go to YouTube and check it out, because a lot of these tools are very, very helpful to understand.
Yeah, so this one, Shane, is super cool. And this answers that nuanced question, like, what is more important, distance or accuracy, right? So you can go into this tool. This tool is awesome. We use this tool. This is in our Ping Copilot, so our fitters will have access to this. We've been using it internally at the Proving Grounds, kind of proving it out, using it with our players. And it's basically like a strokes gain calculator to determine, hey, I'm hitting this driver a little bit further. The dispersion is this, because it's hard to like take two drivers in a fitting and go simulate fairways hit or take them on the course and things of that nature. That's what tour players do. We want to build a tool that gives you that same level of access. So we built this tool. It's called Club Compare. And you can go in here and pick like, okay, I got the G430 versus my gamer. And you can put in how much the distance you're hitting the 430. And then you take this number that you can get on a launch monitor. So this is really cool. You can actually have a measurement of your dispersion, and either in a TrackMan or Foresight, both of them, it's kind of this plus or minus of side or plus or minus of offline. And that gives us a quantitative metric for your left-right dispersion. So you can go into this tool and put in your offline that you had with the 430 in your fitting. Then you can say, okay, my gamer I came in with went a little bit shorter in the dispersion. Let's say the dispersion was the same, but you picked up like 10 yards. And this also answers that question of nuance, Shane, of it's dependent on your handicap. So if you're a higher handicap golfer, it's going to have that intelligence in there that's going to put more importance on distance relative to accuracy versus a tour player or a lower handicap golfer. So you will get right here, you see we had the same dispersion. We gained 10 yards, and I think I put in 18 handicapper. That's 1.1 strokes gained from your distance, and obviously you had the same offline, so the strokes gains is not going to be an improvement in offline, but your total strokes gain is going to be 1.18. And we give you this little picture of on course. What does that mean for you from an ellipse standpoint? So this tool, let's go in here real quick and say, okay, let's say if your dispersion with your gamer was also we gain distance and decrease dispersion, you click find a winner, right? And you will get, now you gain 2.6 strokes gain driving. We have you hitting it further and tighter. So not only can you use this tool to compare your gamer versus our 430 if you go get fit for, you can also compare, I want to try the 430 at a longer length, different shaft versus the 430 with our tour shaft shorter, and do that A/B comparison and get some real quantitative analytics on a driver comparison in a fitting. So our fitters here at the Proving Grounds have been absolutely loving this tool.
Yeah, and for those that are listening that aren't watching this on YouTube, I mean, just to kind of, talk you through how simple this is. When you input, you put your handicap in, you put how difficult your golf course is. There's 3 options in terms of your home club and where you're playing, easy, medium, or hard, which is very, very important, obviously, to understand where you're playing your golf. And then from there, you just basically, to Marty's point, can input and use this slider device to compare the 430 versus the gamer you're using, and boom, you hit a button and it explains it both with picture and information. So I love this stuff. I love what you're doing in terms of the technology, not just for the player, but for your fitters at home, because it's not always easy to explain to golfers what you're trying to have them understand. This helps them understand that without the fitter having to slam it in their head.
Exactly, Shane. And I think you brought up a good point that I actually missed on the tool is you put in your golf course difficulty. So
right,
let's get some real life examples in Arizona. A very hard penalizing driving course here would be like Troon Country Club or Desert Forest, right?
right.
So if you play most of your golf there, you can put that in, and now that priority is going to be way more geared toward dispersion over distance. Let's say you put in Papago or Dobson or something like that. Yeah, that would be quote unquote easy driving course because there's not a lot of penalty, right? And we actually develop those metrics based off of Kapalua on the PGA Tour.
Okay.
Is quote unquote the easiest driving course. It has the least penalty. You can kind of hit it anywhere. Then a very hard driving course is Honda event. It was a PGA National.
Yeah.
Very penalizing if you miss the fairway. So that kind of gives folks a spectrum, and that's what's important to consider where you play golf. Obviously, if you move all around, play all over the place, you'd put medium because that kind of handles everything. But this tool handles all that level of complexity, math, and nuance, and it makes it super actionable for our fitters. So you can have this conversation and go figure out what's more important, distance versus accuracy, for you in your fitting.
So bringing it back to the start, Marty, it sounds like we have an answer here. It sounds like there is an answer to the question, what's more important? And it feels like in 2023, distance is more important. Is that fair to say?
Distance is more important. It's not a binary question, but if we frame it that way, distance is more important. But we've cracked the code. There's a ratio. There's a ratio of distance to accuracy, and we got tools to evaluate it. It's important for both fitters and golfers alike to kind of understand that ratio. And hopefully this has helped some fitters give yourself permission to consider having your driver go further. Our high inertia allows you to get away with it. Our shafts, our counterbalance allow you to go to a little bit longer. The tour players are playing longer length drivers than you think. Victor, Joaquin, all these guys. So hopefully this is help folks. And it, quite frankly, Shane, it's fun to hit it far.
It's a lot more fun. I'll say that. It's more fun when you're bombing it by your buddies. How
Exactly.
often is distance brought up by tour players? You mentioned Victor. You've obviously mentioned Joaquin. Tony is a guy that's kind of effortlessly long. I mean, he can hit it much further if he wanted to on tour, but he's a little bit more of the guy that's kind of taken distance off to hit a little bit more controlled T-ball. How often are they talking about distance on a week-to-week basis, considering how obsessed it feels like we are with the players that hit it the longest?
Shane, that is such a great question. The super long hitters like Tony, he used to be longer. He could hit it longer. We've seen him hit it 400 yards in Utah if he wanted to, right? The guys who are already really long, they just want to be mindful of the dispersion, because after you hit it so far down there, there's there's an asymptote that you reach, or a ceiling that you reach, where hitting it, for Tony to hit it 10 yards further won't actually gain him that much. Like, it's more about hitting the fairway. But if you're Victor, who was more average speed 4 years ago when he first came on tour, now he's way above average. But when he was average, I mean, I played with him in the Phoenix Open, and I was hitting it by him, a little bit. And he was asking me about it. You could tell it was on his mind. Like, man, I wish I could carry those bunkers those cross bunkers that Tony doesn't have to worry about, but I do. Like, this is very agitating.
Yeah, like the bunker on 3, the par 5. It's like, if I can just kind of get it past those effortlessly, then it makes that a par 5 now as a par 4.
Yeah, so that is on the mind. So your tour players that are average speed and below, it's always on their mind. And that's where you see them doing speed training. They're working on the stack. They're the ones that asking us, hey, trying a different shaft, trying to go a little bit longer, experimenting with it. So you have these two groups, I would say. The ones that are average and below, they're trying to eke out because they know there is that real value. And then you have the players that are super long. They're more about being mindful of hitting more fairways.
Marty, have you seen Tony just go after, like, just unleash one? Because, I mean, you can see it when he's playing tour golf. You can see that it's 70-ish%. Have you seen him really go after one before?
Not lately, Shane, but when he was playing like the mini tours and on the big break and all that stuff, that's when his swing, that's when he used to go after it. So I remember seeing him do that, like, 12 years ago, 12, 14 years ago, when he was playing the little mini tours, and his swing was, before him and Boyd kind of tightened it up into the world class player that he is. But I have not seen him do that lately, outside of when he was having fun in Utah there a couple summers ago.
I remember playing with Bubba years ago. I mean, this was probably 10, 11, 12 years ago. And I think it was the last hole. We were playing a scramble. It was a charity event. And the last hole, he looked at me and he goes, "Do you want me to hit the draw?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I'd love to see it." And he hit just this dead straight ball. It probably cut a yard or two, but it probably went 20, 25 yards longer than any tee shot he'd hit throughout the day. And he kind of turned around and smiled. He said, "Did you like my draw?" And that was him just having that. He had a little bit more of a gear, right? He's not going to lean on that in an event. Maybe he does if it's an open fairway or a wide open golf course like Kapalua, but he knows he can go in the bag and grab 15 more yards if he really needs to. And what a benefit that is to a professional golfer, to just have that back in the bag if you need it.
I think a good example, one of the Masters that he won, 13 at Augusta, was kind of downwind. He hit the straight ball that went way down there, and he had sand wedge in or whatever. I remember when he did that.
Yeah, I mean, he hit it like 350 over the trees, and everybody, Marty, if you remember, it was in the air, and everybody thought he'd hit it in trees and he was going to lose the Masters.
Exactly. Same. Yeah, no, I thought the same thing. But I've seen him here in the launch pad at the Proving Grounds. He's hitting his cut that he's hitting down on it like 4 or 5 degrees, 3 degrees, hitting down, swinging to the right for him as a lefty like you, and hitting that big cut. And then he is the most amazing in changing his like delivery, because then one swing later, he hits up 6. His angle of attack goes from down 4 to up 6, and he hits it like 30 yards longer. And I think the lesson learned for the everyday golfer is that straightening your ball flight will gain you distance. Okay. And if you have ample speed like you can hit little cuts for control and things of that nature, but you don't want to be curving it too much, because then that's going to start costing you too much distance. Going back to this topic today, which is what is more important, distance or accuracy. So, we see only the very long tour players hitting it with a significant amount of curve. Most of them, when they're hitting draws and fades, it's pretty minor, like your beautiful little cut you've been hitting down there lately.
Yeah, it's just so tight. When you go watch the modern day professional hit tee shots, they're just tight. I mean, they don't move a whole bunch. Like their goal, or what they're practicing, is hitting that ball as straight as humanly possible and launching it without much side spin. And that is, again, so different than what we saw, a decade ago, where players would lean a little bit more on the side spin to help them get the ball in the fairway. It's just so wild how all of this stuff changes and deviates and improves. And a lot of it comes down to the technology that people like you and Ping do to make it easier on the golfer. So it's very cool to see. I'm playing golf after this podcast, and I'm so excited to go out there and just try to hit straight balls. Like, that's my hope on the round of golf. Don't need to move it. Let's hit it straight. Let's get it in the fairway, and let's let the distance do its job.
Shane, I called the not so dreaded straight ball because the straight ball goes the furthest.
Don't be scared of the straight ball. And you know what else?
Don't
be
scared.
scared of the straight putt. They go in as well. Everybody always gets so weird when the putt's straight. You go, no, just knock that in the back of the hole. Just hit the driver straight. You don't have to move it, even if the hole kind of meanders left to right a little bit. But a very interesting topic, and I think one people are going to really like because, you know, the driver has become the most important club in the bag. I think the putter used to be it, but it feels like the driver is the most important. And it's the one people are the most intrigued by, and the one I think people are always looking at in terms of changing the club in their bag. So great insight, Marty. And again, just a reminder, if you're listening to this, if you downloaded the podcast and you want to kind of see what Marty was talking about, go on YouTube. You can even fast forward to the timestamp in terms of when this landed and when we really got in to the tools. But I think it's great to visually look at what Marty was talking about because it'll help you understand the benefits of bringing up some of these tools that you guys have and some of the tools you guys have out there for your fitters.
Yeah, absolutely, Shane. I think what we've tried to do is you can get very confused or stuck in a fitting, in even our fitters, like what numbers should I be looking at, right? So these tools that we're building into Copilot help make that super actionable. Trying to make the complex simple. Which driver is going to be better? Like, hey, this one went a little further, but that one went a little bit straighter. And it doesn't mean you need to lean on this to 100% make your decision, but use that with all the other things that you're experiencing in the fitting to help upgrade your decision. And this is a super fun topic. I think folks are going to enjoy this. It's kind of like a never-ending debate, distance versus accuracy. So hopefully folks will level up their knowledge a little bit after this pod.
Marty, let's mark it down. In 2 years, let's do this topic again and see if it's the same answer.
Oh, I love it.
We'll do it in 25 and see what comes up. That is Marty. I'm Shane, and this is the Ping Proving Grounds podcast.